Hi, I'm Tony Northup, and this is a free overview on how to use the Fujifilm Finepix series of cameras. I have tutorials like this for just about every camera out there. If you want to see a different camera, go to sdp.io/tutorials. You'll see a wide variety of everything from point-and-shoot cameras like these to full-on DSLRs. I'm not going to cover every single little feature of the camera. I'm going to focus on those things that are core to photography. You might already know some of it if you're a more advanced photographer, or even if you figured out the basics like getting the battery in there. Check the description of this video for a table of contents. You can jump ahead to the topics that interest you specifically. You'll find I don't cover things like how to use special effects, how to use the Wi-Fi features. These are not core to photography. I'm going to show you what you need to know to use your camera to get great pictures. For everything else, just refer to the manual. First up, let's take a look at where the battery and memory card hide. You'll have to put the battery in. This particular camera has 4 AA batteries. That makes it really convenient because you can pick up replacements anywhere. I suggest getting some rechargeables because otherwise it'll get kind of expensive. Check on Amazon for the Eneloop rechargeable batteries. Those are our favorite. I have a little 32 gig SD card in here. You'll put that little notch in the SD card towards the middle of the camera and just push it all the way in until it clicks and stays in there. You can't put it in the wrong way, so don't sweat it too much. Don't spend a lot of money on the SD card. Just get a cheap one for this camera. It should be fine. And 16 gigs, 32 gigs, even 8 gigs would be just fine. You don't need to buy a huge, expensive SD card. Don't spend more than 20 bucks on it. I also briefly want to talk about the case and the lens cap. This camera comes with a lens cap, but you don't need to use it. The front element of this is very sturdy. It's not going to easily get scratched, and even if it does, it's not going to ruin your pictures. I generally tell people to dismiss with the lens cap because it takes so long to put it on and then you lose it, and you spend so much time just getting ready to take a picture that you end up missing moments, and it becomes inconvenient to pull the camera out. And I think the best thing you can do for your photography is to make the photography convenient. So go ahead and use that lens cap if you want, but at the same time, if you want to just leave it in the box and never pull it out again, that's a-okay with me. I'm also fine with not using a case. I'll usually just put a strap on the camera and carry it on my shoulder anywhere. The camera really doesn't need that much protection. It's all very sturdy. By the way, there's a wide variety of Fuji Finepix cameras, so your camera might not look exactly like this camera, but the button layout will be the same, the menus will be the same, and I'll talk you through some of the differences as we go. So no matter which camera you have, if it's a different color or whatever, you're okay. As long as it's a Fuji Finepix camera, I got you covered. There are a couple of ports on this camera. Over here on the side, you'll see this little flap labeled HDMI and USB, and pretty much all cameras have these. You may never ever need to open this, so don't sweat it, but I do want to show them to you. This top port is a mini HDMI port. That's a video cable, just like the cable that might go from your DVR to your TV. And you could get a mini HDMI to full HDMI cable and hook this up to your TV. Then you could put on a little slideshow on the TV directly from the camera. That's one way to do it. Nowadays, people tend to like smaller screens, so you could also just hand the camera around and show people the pictures on the back of the camera. The other port here is a tiny little USB port. So your camera came with a cable that you can use to connect it to your computer. And with that, you could use free software like Google Picasa to load the pictures onto your computer, do a little bit of light editing, and put them on Facebook or Twitter. You don't have to use that USB cable. You can also get a memory card reader that makes it, I find the memory card reader is an easier way to transfer pictures from the camera to the computer. At the end of this video, I'll suggest several accessories for this camera, including a memory card reader, so feel free to skip ahead to that. One of the unique aspects of these cameras is power zoom, and it makes it great for video too. This particular model has 2 power zoom switches on it. First, you got to turn it on. It's a big on-off switch. That's easy to do. There's one on the side of the lens here that when I zoom towards T, that means telephoto, that means zooming in on faraway subjects. When I push it towards W, that means wide angle. That lets me fit a lot more into the picture. This model has a second wide and zoom switch next to the shutter. They do the same thing. Just use whichever is more convenient for you. When you're ready to take a picture, kind of a 2-step process, but most of us have used some kind of camera before, so it might be really intuitive. First, you'll turn the screen on here. You'll push the shutter halfway until it locks into focus, and then you'll push it all the way to take a picture. Now, I've already put this camera into silent mode, so you didn't hear it beep. But I will go ahead and turn that off just so you can hear what's happening. And later I'll show you how to turn off silent mode. So push the shutter halfway, it beeps, push it all the way, it makes a fake shutter sound and actually takes the picture. When you're ready to review the picture, just hit the play button here. And you can see the picture that you took. This picture's not beautiful, but I could scroll back to other pictures by clicking left here with the control pad. And you can see, got some pictures of my wife, Chelsea, here. And you can see that you can also use this camera to get pretty good portraits, especially on the telephoto end. We'll talk more about photographic technique in just a little bit. By default, it's showing me some information about the picture. So you see some writing over the picture. It's telling me things like the date the picture was taken, the time it was taken, as well as my shutter speed, my aperture, and whether or not exposure compensation was used. As you push the disp back button multiple times, the camera will switch between different viewing modes. Off hides all the information. You can add it to the favorites with this, and that just helps you find that picture again later. Push it another time, and it will show you all this information separate from the picture. This is going to be really useful as you get more intense about photography, if you get to that point, because you can see the histogram here, which shows you your exposure. Over to the right, you can see a little spot there, and that tells you that just part of Chelsea's face is completely white from the sun. Because I can see a spike on the left side of the histogram, I know that there's big areas of darkness in the picture, and you can see the background here is very dark, her jacket is very dark. So the histogram is telling you how much light and dark there is in the picture. Dark over on the left and light on the right. So I can see this picture is mostly dark, but it has a little bit of white. And overall, it's a good exposure. In my book, Stunning Digital Photography, Chapter 4, I teach you everything about the histogram. For this, I just want to show you how to pull up the histogram in case you're working alongside in that book. You can also see all your usual settings over here that are usually overlaid when you have the information turned on. If you don't like a picture, if you want to delete it, like here is a picture with her eyes closed. As you're reviewing it, just push up on the directional pad, and then you can select to delete either the frame or specific multiply selected frames. Usually you just want to select frame. That means that one particular picture, and then it prompts you, erase OK, click OK for yes, or click the back button here to cancel it. So I'll click OK and just delete that picture. We get a cool little animation. And then it prompts me to continue erasing pictures, which I don't want to do. So now I'll just click back. The display and back button is something you'll use a lot to move out of whatever menu system that you happen to be in. This particular model has an LCD on the back and then what we call an EVF, an electronic viewfinder. Depending on the model you have, you might not have an electronic viewfinder at all, no problem. There's a button here labeled EVF LCD. If I want to switch between those, I push that button and hold it up to my eye. And then I can see a little picture in there that kind of simulates that electronic or that optical viewfinder that you get on a DSLR. Some models will do that automatically. So you only have to hold the camera up to your eye and it will automatically switch. Some don't. You might have to push that button. On this particular camera, I enjoy using the LCD screen on the back more. So the viewfinder has an advantage in that it blocks out all surrounding light. So sometimes when you're in bright sunlight, you'll be trying to look at the LCD and you just won't be able to see because it's all washed out from the sun. That's the perfect time to turn on the electronic viewfinder and look at it. This model doesn't have a great EVF and it's especially slow. So in general, I enjoy the LCD more. If you do use that electronic viewfinder, you can adjust it to your own vision. If you're a glasses wearer, you can take your glasses off and look through the viewfinder and see everything just perfectly. As long as you adjust the diopter here. So there's a diopter on the side here. What you want to do is you can twist it. So you'll hold it up to your eye and then twist that, turn the viewfinder on, and then twist that until everything is nice and sharp. And in some ways, you might be able to see better than you can without using the viewfinder. If you look through the viewfinder and everything's blurry, but the picture's not out of focus, if things like the menus are blurry when you're looking through the viewfinder, that means the diopter got accidentally hit. So that's one of the most common problems I see is the viewfinder is all blurry. Check out that diopter and you can fix it. Now let's talk about how to take landscape photos with this camera. I'm going to walk through different styles of photography and just give you general tips with them. Landscapes tend not to be particularly demanding. You don't need a fancy camera to get fantastic landscape shots. The most important thing is to be there. I'd rather somebody get an inexpensive camera and set aside some money for travel so they can get out to Yosemite or Glacier National Park or New Zealand or wherever you are. That will get you far better pictures than spending $5 grand on an expensive camera. All you really need to know, you can use full auto mode on this camera and it will be just fine. Now there's lots of scenes, you don't need to worry about any of that. If it were me, I would just put this camera into program mode, that's the P here, and let the camera do its thing. We'll talk about exposure compensation in a little bit, which will help you adjust how bright or dark the picture is. Otherwise, there's really nothing that you need to know about it. For sports, it can be a little more complex. Here's what I recommend for sports. Take the main dial and turn it to S. That's shutter priority mode. That controls how fast the camera is going to be. Now, with the main dial, which is here on the back, twist that until the number you see here is 1/250th for most outdoor sports. That can be your default for sports. It works great for kids. If you get into bigger kids, like high school or even professional sports, you might have to jump up to 1/500th or even 1/1000th. But this camera is going to work best when you use the lowest shutter speed possible. So what I'll do with sports is I'll start at 1/250th, and then as I'm taking pictures, I'll look at them. And if I see too much movement in the picture, if arms and legs are blurred too much, then I'll switch to a faster shutter speed and keep shooting. So you'll kind of get to know what shutter speeds work best for the specific sport that you're shooting and with how fast people are moving and your distance to the field. There's a lot of factors involved. There's not any one set rule. If you're shooting indoor sports, it's going to be a real challenge with this camera because the focusing system isn't ideal for that kind of situation. You'll also want to be sure to use especially a really slow shutter speed inside. So if you can shoot at 1/125th, it says 125 down here, that will make your images much, much cleaner. If you can go all the way down to 1/60th, which will work for some slower moving sports, you can do that. That will work great. You know, a kid on batting, 1/60th will show the bat nicely blurred, but he'll still mostly be sharp. Again, the slower, the lower number you can go on this, the better your images are going to be. But if there's too much movement, go higher and higher. For wildlife, this camera, this particular model has a really, really long zoom lens. Not all the Fuji cameras have such a lens. It's also going to be a challenge, and it's going to be many of the same factors that you see with sports, and that you'll want to be using shutter priority and the lowest shutter setting possible. Now, there are two different factors in getting clear pictures with wildlife. One is the movement of the subject, just like sports. The bird or dog or whatever you're shooting is going to be moving a little bit because it's alive. But your hand is also going to be moving. So you can get camera shake or motion blur. And using a faster shutter speed will fix either one of those. So for wildlife, I will usually start at 1/125th. If the bird or the subject is blurry in any way, then I will just jump all the way up to 1/250th. Shoot again. If it's still blurry, jump even higher. And with wildlife, I'll give you a really important tip. It's the first tip in the book, Stunning Digital Photography. Take lots of pictures and delete most of them. So don't see a bird that you want to get a picture of and take one picture of it. No, take 10 or 20 pictures. Then you can go through and pick the very best one because one of them will always be a little bit better. Your hand will move in one picture. The bird will move in another picture. Taking multiple pictures will almost always help you out. Now with night photography, these Fujifilm cameras can take awesome night pictures. The way I will usually do that is, again, you can probably just use program mode for this. These cameras will go down to multiple second exposures, like 8-second exposures. The automatic mode should work well, especially if you learn to use exposure compensation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You'll also want to use a tripod. Tripod, you attach it to your camera using this screw on the bottom here. It screws right in there. Any tripod will work. They all use the exact same attachment. Finally, one standard we can all agree on. And it just holds your camera steady. At the end of this video, I'll recommend a specific tripod that'll work just great for night photography. You might also, if you get more advanced, you can use manual mode, which I'll discuss in just a little bit. Now, let's go into some of the other modes. I talked about shutter priority already. That lets you control the shutter. Another camera setting is aperture, also known as your f-stop. This is the opening inside the lens in here. It can be a big opening or a small opening. This diagram shows a variety of different f-stops. On the left here we have f2, which is a big wide opening, and on the right here we have f32, which is a little tiny opening. Now, which f-stops your camera supports depends on your camera model because they each have different lenses. These are written on the front of the lens. It's true for most cameras. We'll see 1:, that's telling you that it's going to be the f-stop number. This is the maximum f-stop number, the lowest f-stop number. Low f-stop numbers mean big openings. It goes from f2.9 to f6.5. So at the widest angle setting, when it's all the way retracted, that's f2.9. As we zoom in, it's going to go all the way to f6.5 at a minimum. Depending on the model of camera that you have, you can get varying amounts of background blur by adjusting that f-stop number. So this is a really important technique in photography. And here we have 3 different examples of a portrait that I took with a different camera. And in the one on the left, using f1.8, you can see the background is just completely blurred. In the middle, I increased the f-stop number to f8, and in the last, I increased it to f22. And you can see just Chelsea looks the same in all the 3 pictures, but the background changes just dramatically. Over on the right, the background is very sharp. Over on the left, it's completely blurred. So for portraits, it's traditional to kind of blur out the background. That draws your subject's attention, the person looking at the picture, draws them to the model rather than all the distractions. And it's kind of what our eye does when we focus in on one person and ignore everything that's going on in the background. So that's why it's important to learn how to use aperture priority mode. And indeed, especially when you zoom in a little bit, you can get great background blur with these cameras. What you'll want to do, switch this into A mode, and now you can control the aperture using the main dial on the camera. So as I scroll it to the left, you can see now it's set to f2.9. If I scroll it to the right, I can go all the way up to f8.4. Mentioned earlier, the f-stop number changes as you zoom. So those are what's available at the widest angle setting. As I zoom in, it's set to f2.9 now. As I zoom in, you're going to see that number change. So now the minimum f-stop number is f4.3. Zoom in from some more, f5.5, f7.2, and then as we get all the way out at the long end at 50x on this camera, the minimum f-stop number is f7.8. So the f-stop number, it's a variable aperture lens. The longer you go, the higher the minimum f-stop number is. In general, you can just use the lowest f-stop number on this camera, and that will give you the best results. It doesn't have a big, huge, wide opening that's going to always blur the background for you, so you might not get that much background blur, but you can get some. The one exception to shooting with the lowest f-stop number is going to be for landscape photography. If you're shooting landscape photography and you want to get more in focus, then you can switch into aperture priority mode and just use a higher f-stop number. Instead of using f2.9, I could increase to f3.2, and everything would become just a little bit sharper, or I could jump up to f8.4. And that should give me plenty of depth of field so that things that are close to me and things that are far from me are going to all be in focus. Remember this saying, high f-stop number, high background sharpness, low f-stop number, low background sharpness. We talked about shutter priority a little bit for shooting sports. While aperture priority gave you direct control over the f-stop number using the main dial, shutter priority gives you direct control over the shutter speed. We think of pictures as happening in an instant, but they always happen over a period of time. The camera opens up the shutter and gathers light for a period of time, a very small period of time usually, something like 1/60th of a second. But especially if you're taking pictures at night, it could stay open for a full second, gathering a ton of light. Or if you want to shoot a flying bird, you're going to want to keep that shutter open for only like 1/1000th of a second. Shutter priority gives you control over that. So take your main dial here, click it over to S, the mode dial rather, and then you can control the shutter speed using the main dial here. This Fuji is showing you the shutter speed in the lower left corner. So as I scroll to the left, it goes down, 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 down. Now I'm at 1/15th of a second. It's kind of implying that there's a 1 over it because it's a fraction. So it's a little confusing because you see a smaller number as I scroll to the left, 1/10, 1/6. It's going from 10 to 6 to 5. Those numbers are getting smaller, but the shutter's staying open longer because 1/5 of a second is longer than 1/10 of a second. Just remember, it works kind of backwards. The higher numbers here, this camera goes all the way up to 1/1700th of a second. That's very, very fast. It's a big number, but it's a short period of time. It's a fraction, and you're only seeing the denominator. As I scroll all the way to the left, I can go past 1 second exposures. So now you can see it's showing me a little quote there. So it says 1.5 quote, 2 quote. That means multiple seconds. Now it will stay open for 2 full seconds. If I take a picture, there you go. You can see it took a while. And also the picture was really bright because it's not night in here. It gathered so much light that the whole picture turned out almost completely white. Just know that when you're in shutter priority mode, if you see 2 quote there, that means it's going to be 2 second exposure. You might have to scroll to the right and go over to 2 without the quote. That's a ½ second exposure. It's much faster. In general, when using shutter priority, start with 1/60th. 1/60th is a good all-around shutter speed for taking pictures of people. If you are working in low light and you want to get a really clean image, you could try using a slower shutter speed, especially if you have a tripod. 1/30th of a second is pretty good for indoor shots, especially at night inside. It can be very dark and your pictures will end up really noisy if your shutter speed is too fast. You might even try going slower, like 1/15th of a second. You can often handhold pictures with this camera at 1/15th of a second. As I mentioned earlier, once you get into action, you'll want to freeze that action, and faster shutter speeds will do that. 1/250th is my starting point for kids sports, 1/500th for high school sports, for example, and then flying birds, 1/1500th of a second. This shows 3 different example photos taken at different shutter speeds to give you an idea of the effect that you'll see. On the left there, at 1/8 of a second, that's a very long shutter speed. And you can see my daughter, who's on one of those spinning toys at the playground, I'm sitting across from her, so I'm also spinning. The background for her is very blurred because that's how much the wheel spun while 1/8 of a second passed. At 1/30th of a second, there's much less background panning because it's a shorter period of time. We didn't spin as far. And on the right, at 1/125th of a second, you can see the playground really sharp in the background because the shutter speed was open for just the shortest period of time possible. The background didn't have a chance to move. So that's the kind of difference you can see just by adjusting your shutter speed. Let's jump into manual mode, which it's one of the best advantages of these cameras that they do support manual mode. It's indicated by an M on the mode dial. So I'll turn to that. Shutter priority gave me control over the shutter speed using the main dial. Aperture priority gave me control over the f-stop number using the main dial. In manual mode, you'll use the main dial to control the shutter speed, just like in shutter priority. But now you can also control the aperture by holding down this plus or minus button here and then turning down the main dial. So you can just press that. So I'll press it to switch between the shutter speed and the aperture. Now you can see the camera's highlighting the f-stop number here. So I can press it, dial in f8.4, press it again to switch back to the shutter speed, and dial in 1/125th. So with that and just a couple of button pushes, you can dial in any aperture and any shutter speed. Manual mode is really useful for working in a studio or doing night photography. It's really important to understand it for those more advanced types of photography. But for most photographers, you can get by with just aperture priority mode and shutter priority mode. In fact, most wedding photographers, even pro photographers, won't have to use manual mode. I just wanted to show you where it is in case you get that advanced, but don't be intimidated by it. If you're working through stunning digital photography, you'll get to chapter 10, which covers night photography. And I'll make some references to bulb mode. These cameras don't have bulb mode, unfortunately. I just wanted to mention that so you didn't spend a lot of time looking for it. Bulb mode would allow you to take very long exposures, like 30-second exposures, but that's not something that happens very often, so I wouldn't sweat it. At worst, if you get good at software, you could take, say, 10 3-second exposures and add them together on your computer to total a 30-second exposure, so you're not left out. You can still get there. Speaking of stunning digital photography, I have a variety of books and video training available at very low cost that really digs into the most important types of photography. So today, in this free video, I'm showing you how to use the buttons and dials on your camera. And a lot of people think that's what photography is. It's figuring out how to use this piece of gear. But it's really just a gadget. Photography is an art. And in my books, I will teach you the art of photography. I'll teach you how to use mood and expression and storytelling, how to get a good expression and emotion from your subject, how to really capture that moment and just nail it, as well as covering all the technical aspects. I'll cover the artistic side of it. So we cover both the art and the science. And if you think books are just lame, don't worry. Stunning Digital Photography comes with over 14 hours of video now. So it actually includes a ton of video that you can watch. You can read the book and watch the videos that go along with each section of the book, or you can just decide to watch only the videos. You don't have to read the book. You can pick one or the other. The book stands alone if you don't like watching videos. It's an option. You can just search my name, Tony Northrup, at Amazon, and you'll find lots of different books, and you can read other people's reviews. You can also visit our store directly with worldwide shipping, sdp.io/store. The ebook versions all start under $10. You can get paperback versions too. There's also dedicated video training there in case you just really hate books. I also have books on Lightroom and Photoshop if you get really into it. Let's talk about the different shutter modes. By default, when you turn the camera on and you take a picture, this one's shut down. It will take one picture. It'll focus and take one picture. Even if I hold the button down, it's only going to take one picture. You can change that, and you should change that. This particular camera, you can see what looks like a stack of cameras, or like a camera with paper behind it. That indicates the shutter mode. So I'll push that, and then on the display here, I can select a different shutter mode. My favorite mode is continuous high. So I'll select that, and now when I hold this button down, it takes a whole bunch of pictures. This is really, really useful for any type of photography. Of course, if you're shooting a moving subject like sports, you should be taking multiple pictures. But even if you're just taking a picture of your kids, continuous mode will help you get, it'll improve your odds of capturing that one perfect moment. Because how many times have you taken a picture of somebody and they've just blinked? Or they just had some like derpy momentary expression when they were just about to say something? By taking multiple pictures, you greatly increase the odds of getting one with just that perfect micro expression, that genuine moment of happiness, and it's a really easy thing to do. So instead of just taking one picture, just hold that shutter down and get 4 or 5. Then delete all but the very best one. You don't need to be sorting through 20 pictures. Just pick the very best one and delete everything else. You might even, if it captures too fast, you can hit that button, and instead of doing continuous high, do continuous medium or continuous low. Continuous low especially will take multiple pictures, but you'll be able to get more shots off before it runs out of space. This camera also has a self-timer. That's useful for those times when you want to put the camera on a tripod and then run around, put your arm around your family, and include yourself in the picture. For those real and deliberate selfies, basically. Self-timers are also useful for eliminating camera shake when you are working on a tripod, because if you're taking a night picture and you put it on a tripod and you go to take a picture, as you push that shutter button, you're pushing down on the whole camera, and you'll cause the whole camera to shake. And that will make your pictures less sharp. If you put it on a self-timer, you'll push the shutter down, but then the camera will wait until that shake is gone before it takes the picture. So it's important to know where the self-timer is. If you look below the main dial here, you'll see it looks like a little stopwatch. Just push towards that, and you can see it provides two options, either a 10-second self-timer or a 2-second self-timer. The 2-second self-timer is for when you want to eliminate camera shake on a tripod. The 10-second self-timer is for when you want to run around behind your family, because it's going to take you at least more than 2 seconds to run around unless you're the Flash or something. So I'm not going to use that right now. I'll just turn it off. But that's where the self-timer is. Just wanted to show you the button. Now let's talk about the different focusing modes. On this particular camera, on all the Finepix cameras, you're probably just going to leave it at the default focusing mode. This camera does have different focusing modes, but the default one is going to work the best for you. The other ones can actually end up being a little bit frustrating. I will show you how to change them though. On these cameras, hit the menu button. And in the camera settings up here, we can see shows a little picture of a camera here. We can scroll through this list until we get to AF mode. And then I'll scroll to the right. And now you can see a few different options. Center is the default, which means it will focus in the middle of the picture. Multi will allow you to focus off center, but controlling it can be a little bit difficult. Area AF is like multi in that it can focus off center. You can control the focusing point, but it will expand it a little bit further. And then we have continuous AF, which follows moving subjects, and tracking AF. Now, if you are trying to use this for sports or flying wildlife, go ahead and switch the focusing mode to tracking. But I will warn you, I've used these cameras for sports and it doesn't work very well. When you try to get into the tracking AF, you're going to find that it's just going to miss it most of the time. It's just one of the weaknesses of this particular camera design. All cameras of this class are better at photographing still subjects than moving subjects. If you are getting into tracking moving subjects, you'll be happier with a base model DSLR, something like the Canon T3 or the Nikon D3300. These are cameras that might cost you from $300 to $500 at a minimum. So they can be a little more expensive, but for something like sports or tracking moving subjects, you're going to be much happier with it. So for now, I'm going to go back into the AF mode and just select the center AF point here. Now, center AF doesn't mean that you always have to focus in the middle of the picture. You can use a technique called focus recompose. So what you can do is hold your camera and see that yellow box there? That's where it's going to focus. So I'll push the shutter button down halfway until it focuses. And then I'm just going to hold my finger with the button held halfway down, and now I can recompose. So this allows you to take pictures using, for example, the rule of thirds, an important compositional technique that I teach in stunning digital photography. Focus recompose is going to work really well on this camera. That's going to be the best way to get off-center composition. I find it much easier than trying to change the focusing points. If you want to focus on something really close up, that's called macro. It doesn't make much sense that we call it macro. You'd think it would be called micro, right? Anyway, if you're shooting up close, you'll enable macro mode by pushing the main dial over towards the flower here. So as I do that, it brings up that menu, and now I can scroll through and choose macro or super macro, which allows you to get even closer. And this will allow me to get really, really, really close while keeping things sharp. And the lens is just about touching the screen. This camera gets outrageously close. Look, it's touching the screen now, and it's in focus. You might have better luck zooming back to the wide angle part of this lens and then getting really close rather than standing further back and using the more telephoto part of the lens. So you get the closest zoomed back, which is counterintuitive. When you're done with macro mode, go ahead and turn it back off, because otherwise you're going to have just a difficult time focusing on things. ISO, is the camera's sensitivity to light. And most of these camera modes will have ISO set automatically. So the camera will just take care of it for you, and that's fine. You don't really need to understand ISO for most types of photography. But if you do want to understand every aspect of photography, it's really important to understand ISO. To change the ISO on this camera, you'll hit the menu button. And then again, with the camera selected on the left here, it's not right on the first page. It's the very first thing. You'll see ISO, and you can scroll to the right. And I have it in program mode with a P here. Now I can scroll through all the different ISOs, starting at ISO 100 and going all the way up to ISO 12,800. In this mode, I can also select auto ISOs. And you'll see it says auto 3200, auto 1600, auto 800, auto 400. Obviously, it's an auto mode, so the camera can pick whatever ISO it wants. The number in parentheses there is the upper limit. So if you select auto 3200, the camera will never select an ISO over 3200. So you're just limiting it. If you select auto 400, it won't go above ISO 400. As you shoot at ISO 3200, you'll find that the pictures are very noisy. It's this like digital grain, little specks of red, blue, and green in the background, and it can start to look ugly. It can start to look much less sharp. Lower ISOs will fix that, but it requires much more light. So if you're shooting outdoors, your camera will automatically use a low ISO and you'll get clean pictures, outdoors in sunlight, that is. If you come inside and you have really dim lighting, the camera's gonna have to use a higher ISO. It will do that automatically, and that will make your pictures less sharp, more noisy. You can't really get around that other than adding a whole bunch of light, but you can control it. And if you can use a longer shutter speed, if for example you're using a tripod, then you could manually select ISO 100, put it on a tripod, and let the camera decide to use maybe a full second exposure. Wouldn't work with moving subjects, but for still subjects, that will allow you to get much better image quality. On these cameras, program mode will allow you to use auto ISO, as will the automatic modes. If you go into shutter priority mode, you can still use auto ISO. That's good. But if you switch into aperture priority mode, these models turn off the capability to use auto ISO. So once I'm in aperture priority mode or manual mode, there's no more auto ISO. So now you're on your own. So you might want to steer away from these until you get to the point when you really understand what ISO does. So as you can see in aperture priority, when I go into the menu system and I select ISO, I can manually set it, but there's no more auto there. Now let's talk about exposure compensation. This is a really important setting. Exposure compensation controls the brightness or darkness of your picture anytime you're in one of those auto modes. So I'll switch back to program mode. And as I'm looking at the screen here, you can see the screen should be white, but it's various shades of gray, especially at the top, it's looking kind of gray. If I wanted the screen to be completely white, I could hit this plus or minus button here, and then use the main dial to increase it. So as we look at that, you can see it's getting bright as I'm scrolling it to the right. This shows you, this graph here at the bottom shows you how much exposure compensation you have dialed in. So right now, I'm at +2 stops, which means I'm telling the camera to gather 4 times more light than it would by default. If I scroll this to the left, you'll see the screen get darker and darker and darker. And now it's at -2 stops, which means I'm telling the camera to gather 1/4 the light that it thinks it should get. If I put it in the middle here, now I'm telling the camera, you make the decision on your own, don't make any adjustments. You'll use exposure compensation anytime you're about to take a picture by looking at the back of the screen and you think their faces are too dark. Or the most important part of the picture is going to be too bright, it's going to be overexposed. If it's too dark, you'll add positive exposure compensation to brighten the picture. If it's too dark, you'll add negative exposure compensation to make the picture darker. The most common scenario is taking a backlit picture. If you're taking a picture of a person and the sun is behind them, there's bright sky behind them, you'll have a tendency to have a very dark person and a very bright background. But the person's the most important part of the picture. So in those cases, hit that exposure compensation button and then dial in some positive exposure compensation, then take your picture and you'll probably be much happier with it. When you're done, anytime you adjust the exposure compensation, hit that plus or minus button again and set it back to 0. Otherwise, the next time you go to take a picture, the camera will still be adjusted and it might screw it up for you. In general, if you change a setting, go back and set it back to where you started. In Chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography, I talk about different metering modes for the camera, and I don't recommend you ever change them. Just stick with the default metering on this camera. But if you get into it, I want to show you where that is. You can hit the menu button and then scroll down with the camera icon selected here until you get to Photometry. Photometry? This is Fuji's term for metering mode. So here you can switch between multi, spot, and average. Multi is the best mode. It's the default. It's what you should generally be using. But if you want to play with those other modes, that's where they are. How to use the flash. The flash adds front light from your camera. So it can help fill in darkness. It can help fill in shadows on the face. If you take a picture with the flash, there's a button here that pops up the flash, or some cameras you can just pull it straight up. You probably won't be happy with the results. On-camera flash like this never looks good. It's not that you have a bad camera, it's that it doesn't look good when you have a little tiny source of light and it's that close to the camera's lens. That's why your smartphone pictures with a flash always look terrible too. The light source is too small and it's too close to the lens. But you can use it for some good effect. So you really don't have to do much more than popping the flash up, and then on your main dial you can control the flash by pushing it over towards the flash button. Now, If nothing happens, that's because you haven't met all the requirements for firing the flash. As I close it and I open it, watch the screen here. I'll pop this open and you can see it says suppressed flash, flash deactivated. And then it doesn't give you any more information, and that can be maddening. What you need to do is turn off continuous shutter. So remember this button here that controls how many pictures you take? Push that and set it back to off. And now the flash is no longer deactivated. As I pop it open, now it's saying auto flash. So that's good. So now that I've met that requirement, I can push the flash over here and choose between auto mode, which is going to be fine, forced flash, which will make it take a flash even if it thinks it doesn't need to, or I can go down to slow synchro, which is useful for night photography. If you use slow synchro, if you're taking a picture of a person and you want the city behind them to be nice and illuminated, it will fire a flash to illuminate the people, but keep the shutter open long enough to expose the background. So those are the different flash modes. If you don't want the flash on, turn it off like that. Now you can also use flash exposure compensation. Flash exposure compensation controls the output of the flash. So by default, when you take a flash picture, you're going to feel like everybody's going to be blinded and you're not going to see the background very well. It's almost always too much flash by default. You can turn that down, and you should. It's actually a really useful feature, especially in like aperture priority mode. So I'll pop that flash up. You can see in aperture priority mode, there's no auto mode. If you pop the flash up, it's going to always fire the flash because it knows that you're in aperture priority mode. Therefore, you must know what you're doing. I'll hit the menu button here. And with the camera selected here, I'll scroll until I find flash. And now as I scroll to the right, I can control the flash exposure compensation to add up to 2/3 of a stop or minus 2/3 of a stop. So I'll select minus 2/3 of a stop. And now if I were to take a picture, especially a portrait, even in broad daylight, it would fire a little bit of flash and just fill in the shadows on the face. That can really improve, especially outdoor portraits in sunny conditions, because if the person has the sun in their face, what's going to happen is they're going to have these deep shadows under their eyes, what we call raccoon eyes, and firing flash turned all the way down at minus 2/3 of a stop will just fill in those shadows and make them look much better. So keep that in mind. That's something to put in your toolbox. It's called fill flash, and you'll want to make sure you turn down that flash exposure compensation before you do it. The white balance on this camera will work fine automatically. It's not something you have to worry about. So you can just skip to the next section, but I do want to discuss a little bit for those of you who are getting more serious about photography. White balance is how white things in the world are. Sometimes when you take a picture, especially indoors, you'll notice everything has like a yellow or orange tint to it. Those are the incandescent lights kind of messing with your camera. Now, as you're sitting in your living room under incandescent lights, you aren't looking around thinking everything is yellow. That's because your brain has an auto white balance feature. Your brain goes in and says, I see I'm using yellow lights now. I'm going to adjust for that and make everything look white. So when you pull out a white piece of paper in your room, it looks white. When you take it outside in the sun, it looks white. That's because your brain has that auto white balance feature. Your camera does too, but your camera's auto white balance feature might not always be as smart as your brain. So if you decide you want to control it, you can do that. I'll hit the menu button here. And then with the camera selected, I'll scroll up to the top. And the last setting on the first page is white balance. And you can see it's set to auto by default. If I scroll to the right, I can select from a wide variety of white balances to suit different environments. So you'll basically just pick the one that matches the lighting that you're under, whether it's incandescent or fluorescent, and basically look at the LCD screen on the back until things look white. Now, again, when in doubt, just select auto. And if you don't get it right, don't sweat it. You can always adjust it later using a free tool, something like Picasa on your computer. It's pretty easy to fix. White balance, like exposure compensation, is one of those things where you want to set it back to auto after you're done. So you don't want to adjust it to incandescent and then 2 days later go take pictures outside and shoot it, because then everything will look blue and weird. So be sure you set it back. You'll be thanking yourself in the future. These cameras can record excellent video. This particular model can do 1080 at 60 frames a second, just really smooth playback. To record video, there's a big record button. Just push it. That's really all you need to do. There are a few settings that you can use to tweak the video, but you really don't have to. Make sure that you're not going to get great sound out of it. They do have an on-camera mic. I'm looking for it on this camera. I think that's it under the bottom there. But on-camera microphones never sound good because they're not close to the subject. It doesn't have a mic in port, so that's what you're going to have to use. Anyway, you might want to get a separate recorder if you're recording something like a concert with it, where the sound is really important. But for day-to-day activities, it makes really, really excellent video, and it's really nice to have that there. So while you're out taking pictures, you can quickly grab a video clip. Just want to show you where the button was. The memory card is your digital film. And just like real film, you will eventually run out. It can store thousands and thousands of pictures, though, even if you get a small memory card. So you might never run out. But if you're actively taking a lot of pictures, or especially video, fill it up, take that memory card out, put it in your memory card reader, copy everything to your computer, then back that up. Send it over to, look for cloud backup services, make sure all your pictures are backed up. At that point, you can format your memory card and reuse it. So you can reuse memory cards. Hit the menu button, scroll to the left, and then scroll down until you get to the little wrench icon here. With that, scroll down on the first page to the bottom item, you'll see Format. Scroll to the right here, and it warns you, Erase all data, Format OK. Select OK and click OK here. I don't want to format. I don't want to lose all my pictures. It erases everything. I'm going to click Cancel instead. If you accidentally format your memory card, you can get those pictures back. Just stop taking pictures, because every picture you take will be overwriting at least one of your previous pictures. Then you can put your memory card in your computer using a memory card reader and use a tool called PhotoRec. That will scan your memory card and recover most of those pictures. It works really pretty well. It works on just about every type of computer. If you're unsure, Chapter 5 of Studying Digital Photography has step-by-step instructions for how to use it. When you search, you'll find a bunch of tools that want you to pay. PhotoRec works great, and it's absolutely free, so don't pay for anything. Now let's talk about how to disable that beep. As a wedding photographer, I know every wedding is filled with like that beeping sound. It's just constant, like little beeps everywhere. So I beg each of you to put the camera into silent mode. You'll get used to it. You'll know the camera visually shows you when you've managed to focus it. Hit the menu button. Scroll to the left here and then down to the little wrench icon. Scroll to the right and you'll find silent mode. So I'll scroll to the right here and turn silent mode on. Now the camera makes no sound at all. So nice. It's discreet. It's way better. Please do that. Thank you in advance. Here are a few tips, and I'll cover some gear that you should get. The first thing you should get is a free tool for image editing. I'm not related to Picasa or Google in any way, but the Picasa app from Google, you can get it at sap.io/Picasa. It's free, does a great job of photo editing. If you get more serious or you just have a few bucks to spend, check out Adobe's Lightroom app. It's more serious, it's more complex, it's not free, it's a little more powerful too, but I recommend the Picasa app for most people just starting out. If you want to transfer your pictures to your computer, you can use that USB cable, but it will be pretty slow and I find it cumbersome. I prefer using a memory card reader. They can be had pretty cheaply. This is our favorite model. It's 12 bucks. Pick it up from sdp.io/reader. If you don't use a computer, a Windows or a Mac computer, if you're using a tablet or a phone to edit your pictures, you can do that by getting an SD card reader for your mobile device. Here's the one we recommend for Android phones and tablets. I have a Samsung phone myself. It's $5, and it just wires your memory card into your phone. Pick it up at sdp.io/AndroidSD. If you have one of the newer iPhones or iPads, they have that little Thunderbolt connector. It looks like that. The Apple one costs much more because it's Apple. Go to sdp.io/AppleSD to find that. Or if you have one of the older iPhones and iPads that have that broader connector, the one you have to make sure you have turned in right side up, go to sdp.io/AppleSD. Both those cost about $30. I mentioned earlier how much the on-camera flash kind of sucks. You can do much better by using an external flash. These cameras don't have a way to attach an external flash directly. But with this particular model, the newer TT560 and a lot of off-brand flashes, it's only $30, and you can trigger it by using the on-camera flash. So what you can do with this is you can put this in the corner of a room and take pictures indoors with your flash. This flash will fire in the background and fill the whole room with light. And that will make the light much more natural and even, and it will cancel out any weird colors that you're getting from the indoor lights. This is a wedding photographer's trick. We'll get 3 or 4 of these, spread them around a big auditorium, and then every time we take a flash picture, they'll all fire and just add much more light. You might have to use manual mode, but give it an experiment. Auto mode might work fine for you too. If you want a tripod for selfies or night photography, this is the one I recommend people start with. You can pick it up at sdp.io/tripod1. It's only $50, but it's a great travel tripod. It has a little hook on the bottom so you can hang your bag or something heavy from it to make it really steady. It's just a good all-around inexpensive tripod. And of course, the single most important thing you can do is spend just a little bit of time, even if it's 15 minutes or an hour, actually learning photography. Our YouTube channel here is free and we have 3 new videos every week. So click subscribe. That will just notify you about new videos. There's not any commitment to it or anything. I'd also appreciate if you click like if I helped you out at all. That just lets YouTube know that this is a video they should show to other people. And if you want to get into photography, learn a little bit about the artistic side of it, help you really capture your memories the way you see them, check out my books and videos, sdp.io/store. You can get them directly from us for under $10. We ship worldwide. Everything's available as an ebook or as a physical book. You can also go to Amazon, wherever it is in your local country, and search for my name, Tony Northup, and you'll see literally thousands of reviews from people who've used our products. Again, thank you for watching. I hope I've helped. And if you have any questions, write a comment down below. Take care.